Napoleon's campaign in Egypt. The Battle of the Pyramids, 1798. The geopolitical setting and the context of the invasion. At the end of the 18th century, Europe was in turmoil. Napoleon Bonaparte, already a rising figure in France, was looking for ways to consolidate his power and expand French influence. Meanwhile, England, his great rival, dominated the seas and hampered French trade and expansion. It was in this context that Napoleon conceived the audacious idea of invading Egypt. The choice of Egypt was not random. First, the country was nominally under the control of the Ottoman Empire, but in practice, it was ruled by the Mamluks, local warriors who had a highly trained army. In addition, Egypt was strategically important. Its location served as a connection point between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, facilitating access to India, a territory vital to British commercial interests. Napoleon did not only want to conquer territories, but also to bring knowledge. In a groundbreaking move, he assembled a team of scholars, scientists, engineers, and historians, with the mission of exploring Egypt, documenting its culture, and eventually modernizing it from a French perspective. The presence of this team of intellectuals was a harbinger of scientific discoveries that would forever change archaeology and the study of ancient Egypt. The arrival of the troops and the advance on Giza. In June 1798, Napoleon and his fleet landed in Alexandria, quickly taking control of the city. The march into Egypt, however, was not easy. The French troops faced the scorching heat of the desert and a shortage of supplies. Resistance from the Mamluk forces was fierce at points, but the tactical superiority of the French ensured that the advance continued. The decisive battle would take place near Cairo, in the region of the Pyramids of Giza. The Mamluks, led by Murad Bey and Ibrahim Bey, gathered thousands of horsemen and soldiers to stop the French advance. The Mamluk cavalry was legendary, highly trained men on fast horses, ready to destroy any army that dared to cross their path. Napoleon's brilliant strategy and the use of infantry squares. On July 21, 1798, Napoleon met the Mamluk troops on the banks of the Nile, with the pyramids in the background. The scene was grandiose, and the battle that followed would be equally remarkable. Napoleon, aware of the superior numbers and strength of the enemy cavalry, used an innovative tactical formation, the infantry squares. Each square was made up of soldiers positioned in all directions, forming a kind of mobile fortress. In the center of the squares were the provisions and light artillery, while the sides were protected by bayonets and muskets ready to fire. With this formation, Napoleon ensured that the Mamluk cavalry, despite their skill, could not break through the French lines. The battle was intense. The Mamluk troops attacked with fervor, but were met by a hail of coordinated gunfire. French artillery played a crucial role, decimating the horses and forcing the cavalry to retreat. By the end of the day, the Mamluk army was completely defeated. Thousands of warriors were killed, and Murad Bey was forced to flee to Upper Egypt, while Ibrahim Bey retreated to Syria. The immediate impact and consequences of victory. The French victory at the Battle of the Pyramids was overwhelming. Napoleon not only secured control of Cairo, but also established a firm foundation for the French occupation of Egypt. With this victory, he cemented his prestige as one of the greatest military strategists of his time. However, the French occupation would face significant challenges. The local population did not easily accept foreign rule, and revolts against the French soon broke out. Furthermore, the British fleet, led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, had destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of Abu Qir, isolating Napoleon's troops in Egypt and making it impossible for them to return to France immediately. The cultural and scientific legacy of the campaign. Despite the military difficulties, Napoleon's campaign left an invaluable scientific and cultural legacy. During the occupation, the team of French scholars documented ancient monuments, carried out excavations, and collected artifacts that would enrich European knowledge of ancient Egypt. The Rosetta Stone, discovered during this expedition, was instrumental in the deciphering of hieroglyphics and marked the beginning of modern Egyptology. Napoleon also attempted to introduce administrative reforms and modernize Egypt's infrastructure, but his efforts were met with distrust by the local population. The combination of internal resistance and external pressures would eventually end the French occupation in 1801, after the surrender of the French troops. Answers for British and Ottoman forces. Reflections on the campaign and historical significance. Napoleon's campaign in Egypt was a mixture of military ambition, scientific exploration, and cultural clash. Although it was a military and strategic failure, its cultural impact was profound and lasting. The Battle of the Pyramids stands as a symbol of Napoleon's strategic skill, while also illustrating the complex interactions between empires and cultures during the era of European colonialism. The collapse of the French occupation and Nelson's role. With the defeat of the French fleet at the Battle of Abu Qir, 1798, led by British Admiral Horatio Nelson, Napoleon's campaign in Egypt was dealt a severe blow. Stranded on foreign territory, French troops were cut off from Europe, leaving them without reinforcements or communication with the government in Paris. Although Napoleon won the battles on land, Britain's naval control reversed French gains. Lack of supplies and local revolts made it increasingly difficult to maintain dominance. Nelson, known for his strategic skills, secured the British victory and consolidated the sea blockade, a factor that would ultimately lead to the French collapse in the region. Comparisons with other colonial campaigns. An interesting parallel can be drawn between Napoleon's campaign in Egypt and other European colonial interventions, such as the British colonization of India and the French advance into North Africa decades later. In all of these campaigns, we see a combination of economic ambition, a desire for political domination, and a certain burden of civilization in an attempt to impose Western values on different cultures. However, Egypt was one of the first examples in which a conqueror took with him a scientific body to explore and document the local culture. This model would later be replicated in other colonial expeditions, but it also brought to the fore the tension between scientific exploration and economic exploitation, a theme that permeates discussions of cultural heritage and colonialism to this day. The legacy of the Rosetta Stone and the foundation of Egyptology. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799 is one of the most important legacies of this campaign. The stone, bearing inscriptions in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphics, was instrumental in the linguist Jean-François Champollion's deciphering of Egyptian hieroglyphics in 1822, thus founding the science of Egyptology. This discovery is a prime example of how European military campaigns often had a profound impact on the fields of science and the arts. However, it also raises questions about the ethics of such discoveries and the fate of the artifacts that were taken from the region to museums in Europe, many of which remain in dispute to this day. The cultural and literary influence of the Egyptian campaign. Napoleon's campaign also inspired countless artistic and literary works. European writers and artists were fascinated by Egypt's exotic landscape and ancient monuments. This fascination fueled the artistic movement known as Orientalism, which portrayed the Middle East and North Africa in a romanticized and often distorted light. In addition, Napoleon's campaign served as a kind of foundational myth for the idea of a civilizing mission that would justify future colonial interventions in Africa and Asia. Although Napoleon himself never returned to Egypt, his expedition left a profound mark on the way the West came to view this region of the world. Napoleon's escape and the end of the campaign. In August 1799, realizing that the military situation in Egypt was deteriorating and that political stability in France was threatened, Napoleon abandoned his army and returned to Europe. Leaving General Jean-Baptiste Kleber in command, he returned to Paris and quickly took control of the French government, paving the way for him to become emperor a few years later. The withdrawal of French troops from Egypt was completed in 1801, following an agreement with British and Ottoman forces. Although the campaign ended in military failure, it paved the way for British rule in the region and the subsequent transformation of Egypt into a European protectorate. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign is one of the most fascinating combinations of warfare, science, and culture in modern history. It illustrates the interconnection between military power and knowledge, revealing how conflict shaped both politics and cultural understanding between nations. More than just a military battle, the Battle of the Pyramids was an event that symbolized Napoleon's ambition and genius, but also highlighted the complex dynamics of colonialism and the cultural interactions that emerged from these occupations. We will expand the text, delving deeper into each section, ensuring a continuous and immersive narrative that contextualizes the Battle of the Pyramids and its implications in several dimensions: historical, military, cultural, and political. Napoleon's campaign in Egypt. Context and opening. The end of the 18th century was a period of great turmoil in Europe. After the French Revolution, the young republic sought to consolidate its power amidst a scenario of rivalry with other European powers. Among these powers, England emerged as one of France's greatest adversaries, especially for naval control and supremacy in international trade. Napoleon Bonaparte, already an acclaimed general after his victories in Italy, sought to expand his personal and military influence. The idea of invading Egypt emerged as a strategic way to harm British interests in the Mediterranean and open an alternative route to India, a jewel in the British crown. With this goal in mind, Napoleon did not limit himself to just sending troops. He led a multidisciplinary expedition, combining military and intellectual forces. Arrival in Egypt. Obstacles and first encounters. Upon landing in Alexandria in June 1798, Napoleon and his army were quickly confronted by the challenges of the Egyptian desert: intense heat, lack of water, and local resistance. However, with their skill in strategy and leadership, the French army managed to take Alexandria and begin its march towards Cairo. The Mamluks, the military leaders who controlled Egypt, had a formidable cavalry. They were experienced warriors whose skill and speed in combat intimidated their opponents. The French presence was seen as a direct threat, and the Mamluk leaders, Murad Bey and Ibrahim Bey, organized their troops to intercept the invaders before they reached Cairo. The strategy of the infantry squares, a decisive moment. The Battle of the Pyramids took place on July 21, 1798, on the banks of the Nile, with the majestic backdrop of the pyramids. On this day, Napoleon demonstrated one of his greatest strategic innovations: the formation of infantry squares. This tactic consisted of organizing his soldiers into defensive formations that resembled mobile fortresses. Each square was protected by ranks of soldiers armed with bayonets and muskets, ready to repel attacks from any direction. The strategy proved effective against the Mamluk cavalry, which, despite its skill, was unable to break through the French formation. Light artillery positioned within the squares provided additional defense, allowing the French to inflict heavy losses on the enemy. By the end of the day, the Mamluk forces were decimated, and the surviving leaders, Murad Bey and Ibrahim Bey, were forced to flee, securing Napoleon's victory. Political and military impact of the victory. With the victory at the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon secured control over Cairo, Egypt's largest city. This achievement was a significant victory, both militarily and symbolically, as it consolidated the French presence in the Middle East. However, the occupation would face increasing resistance from the local population, as well as external obstacles. Shortly after this victory, Napoleon faced a devastating blow. The French fleet was destroyed in the Battle of Abu Qir, commanded by British Admiral Horatio Nelson. With this defeat, Napoleon's troops were isolated in Egypt, without supplies and without the possibility of reinforcements from Europe. The situation became precarious, and the initial euphoria of victory was replaced by a constant struggle to maintain control over the territory. The scientific dimension of the campaign and the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. One of the most notable aspects of Napoleon's expedition was the inclusion of a team of scientists, engineers, and historians, whose mission was to explore and document Egyptian culture. This initiative resulted in important archaeological discoveries, such as the Rosetta Stone, found by chance by French soldiers in 1799. The Rosetta Stone contained the same text written in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphics. His discovery allowed linguist Jean-François Champollion to decipher the hieroglyphs decades later, paving the way for the creation of modern Egyptology. This discovery was a landmark for science and history, but it also raised ethical questions about the appropriation of cultural artifacts by foreign powers. The end of the campaign and Napoleon's escape. As the French occupation of Egypt became untenable, Napoleon made an unexpected decision. In August 1799, he left command of the troops in the hands of General Jean-Baptiste Kleber and returned to France. The political situation in Paris demanded his presence, and he saw an opportunity to consolidate his power. With Napoleon's departure, the Egyptian campaign collapsed. In 1801, the French troops surrendered to British and Ottoman forces, ending the brief occupation. Although the campaign was a military failure, its cultural and scientific impact was profound and lasting. Orientalism and the European fascination with Egypt. Napoleon's campaign in Egypt had a lasting impact on European art and literature, fueling a fascination with the Orient that would give rise to the artistic movement known as Orientalism. This movement, although often romanticized, reflected a distorted and idealized view of the Orient, which served to justify future colonial interventions. European artists and writers portrayed Egypt as an exotic and mysterious place, populated by ancient ruins and fascinating cultures. This narrative helped to shape the European imagination of the Middle East and North Africa, but it also contributed to the perpetuation of stereotypes and prejudices that persist to this day. The Battle of the Pyramids and its legacy. The Battle of the Pyramids was not just a military victory. It was an event that symbolized Napoleon's strategic skill and ushered in a new era of cultural and scientific interactions between East and West. Yet it also exposed the tensions inherent in colonialism, revealing the complex power dynamics between European powers and local cultures. This campaign remains relevant today, not only as an example of military brilliance, but also as a study in the cultural and political impacts of imperialism. The Battle of the Pyramids is a reminder that history is shaped not only by victors, but also by those whose voices are often ignored in traditional narratives.